On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
Bob Denver, forever remembered as Gilligan, the bumbling yet lovable first mate stranded on Gilligan's Island. He passed away on September 2, 2005 at the age of 70 from complications following treatment for throat cancer. The irony was striking. An actor whose career rested on comedic timing and an unmistakable voice was ultimately undone by an illness that attacked his ability to speak and breathe. His death reflected not only the fragility of life, but also the lasting shadow of tobacco use, a widespread cultural habit of his era that left many of its icons facing similar battles late in life. Denver's career was both a blessing and a burden. Gilligan's Island, though short-lived on television, became a cultural juggernaut in reruns, syndicated endlessly across generations. Yet while millions adored him, Denver himself struggled with typecasting, finding it difficult to break free from Gilligan's shadow. His passing highlighted this tension. Was he merely Gilligan, or something more? In truth, Denver's death underscored the era's values of television as a unifying force. In the 1960s, when families gathered around the TV, characters like Gilligan weren't just entertainment. They became part of the cultural fabric. The immediate consequence of his death was a wave of nostalgia. Fans worldwide mourned not only the man, but the innocence of a television era he represented. Tributes poured in, not from Hollywood elites alone, but from everyday viewers who had grown up laughing at his antics. His death didn't shift the trajectory of history in a political sense, but it amplified his legend. Denver became a symbol of enduring lightheartedness, a reminder of a simpler time in American pop culture. In reflecting on his passing, we see how humanity immortalizes figures not just for their personal achievements, but for the emotions they evoke. Bob Denver is remembered through reruns, documentaries, and countless homages that keep Gilligan's clumsy charm alive. His legacy illustrates how memory, especially in the age of television, is preserved through repetition. Each laugh track, each pratfall, keeps him in the cultural consciousness. Ultimately, Bob Denver's death reminds us of a deeper truth. Mortality may silence the actor, but not the character. Through the lens of memory and media, Gilligan still stumbles across the island, unchanged, untouched by time. And in that way, Denver achieves a kind of immortality, proof that comedy, when it strikes the right chord, can outlive even the frailty of human life. On September 2, 1973, the world lost one of its greatest storytellers. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, better known as J.R.R. Tolkien, passed away at the age of 81 in Bournemouth, England, after complications from a bleeding ulcer and chest infection. His death was natural, the quiet closing of a long life shaped by war, scholarship, and imagination. Yet it carried with it the weight of an era. Tolkien belonged to a generation scarred by the trenches of World War I, and much of his work, from the darkness of Mordor to the Brotherhood of the Fellowship, was his answer to the violence and disillusionment of the modern world. His passing symbolized the fading of that generation, and with it, the end of an age of writers who transformed war's trauma into myth. The immediate consequences were deeply felt. Fans across the globe mourned, not simply because a beloved author had died, but because the guiding hand behind Middle-earth was no longer there to expand its vast mythology. His death left unfinished works, including parts of the Silmarillion, which his son Christopher would later edit and publish. This ensured Tolkien's legacy grew even larger after death. His passing didn't silence Middle-earth, it opened new doors to it. The publication of these posthumous works amplified his legend, showing the world just how immense his creative vision had been. Tolkien's death also came at a time when fantasy literature was beginning to find mainstream traction. His absence only magnified the mythic aura surrounding him. The professor of myth had left the stage, but his creation lived on, influencing every corner of modern fantasy, from novels to films, games, and beyond. His passing didn't just mark the end of a life, it shifted the trajectory of an entire genre, securing him as its eternal cornerstone. In reflecting on Tolkien's death, we see humanity's deep desire to give meaning to mortality through memory and myth. We immortalize such figures not only with statues or tributes, but by keeping their worlds alive. Through film adaptations, fan conventions, and endless reinterpretations, Tolkien's voice still guides us. His death reminds us that while flesh fades, imagination endures. He showed us that even in endings, there are beginnings, and through memory and art, mortals can brush against immortality. On September 2, 2001, Troy Donahue, the golden-haired heartthrob of 1960s Hollywood, died at the age of 65 in Santa Monica, California. His death came suddenly, the result of a heart attack just days earlier that his body could not recover from. Natural in cause, yet tragic in timing, his passing reflected the harsh truth of a life that had once embodied American ideals of youth, glamour, and promise. Donahue had risen to fame as the ultimate clean-cut leading man, a symbol of an era when Hollywood sold dreams of innocence and romance. But behind the polished surface was a man who struggled with the very pressures his stardom created, battling typecasting, failed marriages, and years of substance abuse. His death was a quiet reminder of the fleeting nature of fame in an industry built on image. The immediate impact of his passing was felt most strongly by those who remembered him as the idol of another time. By 2001, Donahue's star had long faded, his name more likely to spark nostalgia than headlines. Yet his death reopened a window to the past. Fans and critics revisited the cultural moment he had once defined, the post-war optimism of America, when blonde surfside heroes and wholesome romances dominated screens. His departure, in a way, amplified his legend, not by what he became later in life, but by what he represented at his peak, the dream of eternal youth in a decade on the cusp of change. In the larger story of Hollywood, Donahue's death serves as a turning point of reflection. It reminds us how swiftly fame can be won and how easily it can vanish. He was not a Brando nor a Dean, but in his own way he was the face of a generation's softer, more idyllic fantasies. The fact that his name still evokes that pastel-colored era of cinema shows how we immortalize figures not for their longevity, but for the emotions they once stirred. In remembering Troy Donahue, we are reminded of humanity's fragile relationship with time. We cling to beauty, to youth, to the dream that those golden summers can last forever. And through film reels, magazine covers, and fan recollections, Donahue does live on, frozen in the glow of an era that believed in perfect sunsets and endless romance. James Darren, the actor and singer who embodied cool charm in mid-20th century Hollywood, is remembered for his roles in Gidget, The Time Tunnel, and later as a smooth-voiced crooner. But unlike many of his contemporaries whose lives ended tragically young, Darren's passing in 2024 at the age of 87 was the result of natural causes. He died peacefully, a quiet exit that stood in stark contrast to the high drama of the careers he once lived out on screen and stage. His death reflected the shifting values of his era and the generations that followed. Darren had come of age in a Hollywood that celebrated youthful heartthrobs, clean-cut images, and carefully crafted stardom. Unlike the troubled icons of his time, actors like James Dean or Montgomery Clift, Darren endured. His longevity spoke to resilience, adaptability, and a refusal to be consumed by the pressures that destroyed so many of his peers. In an industry known for its cruel disposability, his ability to reinvent himself, moving from acting into music and even behind-the-scenes directing, was itself a triumph. The immediate consequence of his passing was a wave of nostalgia, particularly among those who grew up in the post-war years when his films and songs defined a certain vision of youthful innocence. His death reignited conversations about an era of entertainment that now feels distant, a time of beach movies, swinging jazz, and optimistic science fiction television. Unlike deaths that shock the world into silence, Darren's passing drew reflection, a gentle reminder of a cultural moment that shaped mid-century America's sense of identity. Did his death amplify his legend? In a sense, yes, not through scandal or tragedy, but through contrast. Darren's peaceful departure underscored the rare story of a Hollywood star who survived the turbulence of fame with dignity intact. He became a symbol not of wasted potential, but of fulfillment, longevity, and grace. Ultimately, James Darren's life and death remind us that mortality is not always about flames extinguished too soon. Sometimes it is about the lasting glow of a steady light. We immortalize such figures not just in films and records, but in the emotions they leave behind, the warmth of a song, the charm of a smile, the memory of an era when Hollywood still believed in happy endings. Tom Baker, not to be confused with the beloved British actor who played Doctor Who, was an American film and television actor whose life and career embodied the restless creativity of the countercultural 1960s and 70s. Born in 1940, Baker was a friend and collaborator of Andy Warhol, appearing in Warhol's experimental film, I, a Man, in 1967. Yet his promising career was cut short. In 1982, at just 42 years old, Tom Baker died of a drug overdose, a fate tragically common among artists of his generation. His death reflected the turbulence of the era he came from. The counterculture valued freedom, rebellion, and experimentation, but it often carried a hidden cost. Drugs and excess were woven into the fabric of the artistic scene, a symbol of liberation that too often became a weapon of destruction. Baker's passing, sudden and avoidable, underscored the fragility of lives lived in the fast currents of fame and artistic exploration. Unlike carefully groomed Hollywood idols, Baker belonged to a world of risk-takers who blurred the line between art and life. His overdose was both a personal tragedy and a cultural statement, another warning about the dangers that haunted those chasing the edges of creativity. The immediate consequence of his death was silence. Unlike megastars whose deaths shake the world, Baker's passing was quieter, noticed most in the underground art community that had championed him. Yet in that silence lay significance. His death highlighted the ephemeral nature of experimental art and the human toll it often exacted. It also reminded the public of Warhol's factory scene, a creative hub that gave voice to outsiders but too often consumed its own. Did his death amplify his legend? In certain circles, yes. Baker became one of those tragic figures whose life is remembered not for mass recognition, but for the way it reflects a cultural moment. Like many who burned brightly in Warhol's orbit, his early death preserved him in the mythology of the avant-garde, a reminder of how fragile that dream really was. Ultimately, Tom Baker's story reveals how humanity grapples with the cost of art, freedom, and excess. We immortalize such figures not through blockbuster films or monuments, but through whispers in history, cult films, and the ongoing fascination with the Warhol era. In remembering Baker, we also remember the darker shadows of creativity and how mortality often shapes the legacy of those who dared to live outside the lines. Marsha Mae Jones was born into Hollywood. Beginning her career as a child actress in the 1930s, she appeared in films like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Heidi, where her performances carried a touching sincerity that made her a familiar face to audiences of the Golden Age. But like so many child stars, her early fame didn't translate into lifelong stability. By adulthood, Jones found herself working steadily, but often in smaller roles, navigating an industry that rarely allowed its child prodigies to mature gracefully on screen. Her life came to a quiet end on September 2, 2007, in Burbank, California. She was 83 years old, and her death was due to natural causes. Unlike the tragic early endings of many Hollywood peers, Jones lived a full life, one that reflected both the endurance and the struggles of an actress who had grown up under the relentless gaze of the studio system. In a way, her passing was a reminder of how much the industry had changed. She belonged to an era when child actors were commodities of the big studios, often worked to exhaustion and then discarded when they no longer fit the mold. Her longevity was itself a kind of quiet triumph. The immediate consequences of her death were modest. Tributes from film historians, fans of classic cinema, and those who remembered her as Shirley Temple's on-screen companion. While she may not have commanded headlines like Hollywood's giants, her death reopened a conversation about the lives of child actors and the invisible weight carried by those who grew up in the spotlight. Did her death amplify her legend? Perhaps not in the conventional sense, but her story gained resonance as part of a larger narrative about Hollywood's past, a symbol of resilience, nostalgia, and the fleeting nature of youthful fame. Her life became a chapter in the cautionary tale of child stardom, where survival itself becomes a legacy. In the end, Marsha May Jones reminds us of humanity's complex relationship with fame and memory. We immortalize figures like her not through grand monuments, but through the films that quietly endure. Each time Heidi or Tom Sawyer flickers across a screen, her youthful face lives again. Proof that even lives lived in the margins of stardom can leave lasting echoes in art, memory, and history. In 490 BCE, amid the clash between Athens and Persia, a lone runner carved his name into history. Phidippides, the Greek messenger, became immortal through a single act of endurance, and a death that defined both human limits and heroic sacrifice. According to legend, after the Greeks triumphed at Marathon, Phidippides was ordered to run nearly 26 miles to Athens and deliver the news. Exhausted from battle and from having already run great distances in the days before, he reached the city, proclaimed Nike, victory, and collapsed dead on the spot. His death was not violent by sword, but by the sheer demands of body and duty. It reflected the values of his era: devotion to the polis, the belief that service to one's city-state was worth any sacrifice, even life itself. The immediate consequence of his death was symbolic rather than strategic. Athens learned of its victory, but Phidippides' collapse became a story that outlived the battle itself. In a culture that celebrated physical excellence and heroic devotion, his sacrifice became legend. Later writers like Plutarch and Lucian preserved his tale, shaping it into myth, while the modern world transformed his final run into the foundation of the Olympic marathon. Did his death amplify his legend? Absolutely. Without it, he would have been one more forgotten soldier of the Persian Wars. Instead, his collapse crystallized the Greek admiration for endurance, selflessness, and loyalty to the collective. His story endured because it captured something timeless: the idea that one person's suffering can carry the weight of an entire people's triumph. Reflecting on Phidippides, we see humanity's complex bond with mortality and memory. His death reminds us that power is not always won with swords, but sometimes with steps taken in devotion to a greater cause. We immortalize him not through statues or epic tombs, but through the continued act of running, each marathon a living echo of his fateful sprint. In the end, Pheidippides stands as proof that even in death, the human spirit reaches beyond the grave. His sacrifice was not just for Athens, but for history itself, a reminder that endurance, loyalty, and memory are the ways we defy mortality.